Well, I think it was an offer. I didn't have to go and meet anybody. Sometimes you have to go and meet people. And I remember once going up for something where it was hush hush, don't talk about it. And so I said, well, I'll wear a suit. And I went along and it was for the part of a tramp. So I didn't get the part because they hushed, we mustn't talk about this. But that was an offer.
Close the door, John.
Have you kept your promise?
Did you doubt me?
That poxy Admiralty, I always doubt you. Did you tell them you wouldn't go out again?
Yes, my love. And I've so displeased their lordships that perhaps I'll never be asked to go out again.
Oh, let it be never again.
Let it be.
Oh, you don't mean that.
I do.
Glenda Jackson and Peter Finch didn't get on because Glenda wanted to rehearse and Peter was a film actor. He just wanted to, and he wasn't lazy, but he didn't like rehearsing because he said, I lose the impetus, and I could see it. Glenda hadn't done many films. I think she'd done one film, which she was up for an Oscar for. I'm not sure about that. But so they never got on well. And I played, my part was comparatively quite small. I think Jim had cast me because he'd directed me on a First World War poet. But it had a marvellous cast. Margaret Leighton was in it. He died about 5 or 6 years later. The writer turned up occasionally. Nigel Stott was in it, and it was quite a good cast, actually. But there again, I was only on it for about... it was great doing that battle scene, that Kiss Me Hardy and all that, because he was great to work with, and I got on very well with him. And actually, Peter wasn't drinking all that much at the time, which helped. I don't think... Well, you see, I don't think it ruined his career the same as it did Burton's, the drink, because he could take it.
You see how careless I've become?
I'll send a midshipman to your cabin.
I think the time has passed for changing clothes. Bad gunnery. We'll be firing at each other next. Some time before we can open fire, so shall we continue our walk?
Well, I was lucky because I'd worked with Glenda, and so she and I got on all right, and I couldn't say much, but because I did say at one point, I said, listen, I said, Peter's got a totally different idea. He's a film actor and he doesn't like rehearsing. She said, well, I don't care. I'm used to rehearsing and I wish he'd compromise. And they should have, Jimmy Cellan-Jones should have got them together and said, listen, don't, but he didn't. He should have said, don't behave like that, either of you. I want a compromise between this. And, but I had a lovely scene after I have to tell her that Nelson has died afterwards.
Forgive me, my lady. I have more to tell.
I know you have, Captain. I know what other news you are bearing to the Admiralty.
How? Who has told you?
No one has told me, for no one needed to. I knew when he left I would not see him again alive. How else, if you are Nelson, can you leave this life except at the moment of your greatest triumph?
I'd worked with Glenda. I did the Scotch play with her, well, a shortened version on radio. But I had good memories of that, and I got to know Finch quite well, and I saw him once or twice afterwards. Dominic, in fact, had quite a bad stutter, but he was okay if, Jimmy directing him was marvellous because he said, just take your time. So once he got into it, he was all right, but Jimmy was very kind with him. I'd seen it on stage, actually, with Ian Holm playing Nelson, and he was very good. But it wasn't one of Rattigan's best plays by a long way. And Rattigan, when you think of Margaret Leighton playing a tiny part in that, I think it was towards the end of her career. But it did have some good people in it.
Oh, come on, Minto, don't just sit there. Lend a hand.
Pull for the shore, is it? Right.
Oh, where were you last night? The court ball, I suppose.
Yes, I was surprised not to see you there.
It's a poxy lie. You knew we wouldn't be asked.
Oh, an oversight, surely.
Oversight my arse. They won't have us at any price.
The scenes on the shit, because they didn't have all that much money, they used a lot of stuff from other films, and no critic got hold of it. They used battle scenes from other films because they didn't have any money. That was shot inside the studio. Inside the studio, because Rocky Taylor, one of the stunt guys who's still around, and Nicholas Lyndhurst said to me when I was working on Only Fools and Horses, he said, I was one of the gunpowder boys on that. I didn't have any lines, and he was only about 16 or 17, and he was on it. I said, I didn't know. He said, well, you wouldn't have known who I was. I said, I didn't treat people. He said, no, it was just one of those things. It was strange, wasn't it? I think the special effects and everything were so fantastic that it made it look as if we were sailing along on the crest of a wave. I think Hardy was a Devonian, I'm not sure, but I mentioned to Jim, he said, no, don't just play it as yourself, because we don't want to get that kind of thing in. But I think, I may be wrong, but to me, in some ways, it didn't have any great depth. He was just a great mate of Nelson's and was very upset when he died. So there was no great depth to go into with the characterisation. But I do remember once when we were filming in Richmond, and I was in my full rig out, and we shouldn't have done this, but I said, I'm going to go into the local bank in my full rig out with all the finery. And I said, excuse me, she said, and she was a lady of about 30 odd. I said, I invested some money here in about 1810. Could you tell me how much? She said, well, hardly anything. Well, there might be. How much did you invest? I said, a few £100. And I was dressed in this full. She didn't bat an eyelid, but she did smile. And I said, I'm sorry, I'm just being silly. I did it for a bet. She said, it doesn't matter. But she did work out that £100 invested in 1810 would have been worth around about, I don't know, wasn't all that much. It was about 1,000. It's very strange when you think of wearing a costume, because you obviously don't want to look ridiculous. I mean, it's okay if it's something like Hardy, because I was dressed in the full regalia of a captain of a ship. But Ralph Richardson used to say, as long as I get the shoes right, it's okay. Now, I know what he meant, because if he felt happy walking along, especially on stage in his shoes, that was it. And I remember working with him once, and he'd got he used to wear brown shoes on a Monday, black shoes, etc., etc. He had about 10 pairs of shoes, this was in 1980 something, that he'd bought before the war at Lobbs for a £5. I mean, 1938-39, a £5 was quite a lot of money. He's still got 10 pairs of shoes that he burnished and burnished. I mean, it's amazing. He also bought about 20 umbrellas from some that were worth quite a lot of money after the war, because he said, well, I think there's going to be a rush on boots and umbrellas after the war. But these boots were then, what, nearly 50 years old, and he'd still got 10 pairs of them. I know, because I asked him. He said, I've probably got a dozen or so, and I'm sure he had. But you've got to get the right costume, and sometimes you can I've never been all that perturbed about wearing a costume I didn't particularly like, I suppose. Although the first costume, it was one of the reasons that made me go into acting, I suppose. I was playing a pantalone, kind of Italian kind of clown in a pantomime in the amateur group in Nottingham. And I had one word, which was gosh, which I said about 30 times, gosh, various types of gosh. And I remember one matinee when, we only did about 7 or 8 performances as amateurs. I had to go into the audience, and this little girl, and I think she was spina bifida, she was about, I don't know, 9 or 10. She said, "I love you, Mr. Gosh." And I thought, if you can have that effect on somebody like that, it was I was about 20, I suppose, when that happened. And I thought, yeah.
After an unremitting cruise of 2 long years in the stormy seas off Toulon, to have proceeded without going into port to Alexandria from the West Indies, back again to Gibraltar, to have kept your ships afloat, your rigging standing.
Barely.
Yes, quite so.
I met Roland and I knew some of his sons when my son was acting in America. We met Roland in a pub, and this was this Welshman. "You know him?" And he said, "Yes." And Roland was one of those gentleman actors. I said, "Would you like a drink?" He said, "What time is it?" "Oh, yes. Things over the yard arm at the moment. Yes, I'll have a whiskey, please." Because he was people nowadays wouldn't know who the hell he was, but he was a very fine English actor, like Richard Vernon and people like that. Yeah, I liked him a lot. I only had the one scene with him, I think. He was very, very good.
Thank God I have done my duty. For which, much more than you will ever know, you should thank my darling Emma. It's difficult to see you. Kiss me.
Believe me, play the part because of my not ever unto the will of mine enemy.
Well, they say that it was Kismet Hardy, and somebody Arabic, but Kismet, in fact, is Turkish for fate. But I don't believe that, because I think the majority of people wouldn't believe it now, because I know they'd been on various campaigns, but he wouldn't have said Kismet, fate, because it kissed me Hardy, and that was it. I'm going to die, and I've got a photograph of that. It's it was a lovely scene to do. Peter Finch, after that, put me up for Lost Horizon with Lee Ullman, who auditioned for Nicholas Alexander and didn't get the part because Sam Spiegel said she'd got a foreign accent. But that's beside the point. But Peter was sweet because he put me up for the part, and I couldn't do it for some reason. No, the script was so awful I couldn't do it, and it got torn to pieces. Michael York played it, and it wasn't very good at all. I'm so glad I didn't do it, but it was sweet of him because he put me up for another part after that, and I couldn't do that because, it's nice when I try and do that still. I was lucky because Olivier and Guinness were so generous-hearted, and they put people up for various things, which is good of them. Well, it was just enjoyable meeting Peter Finch, but there again, it was one of those films that it came and went, and I enjoyed myself on one or two others, but it was great meeting Peter Finch.